Getting into competitive Pokemon can be an intimidating task with all the various things you have to understand to actually be good at the game. However, I am here to make that daunting task a little bit easier by breaking down the barriers that stop people from entering VGC, like where do I start? How do I build teams? And today's subject, terminology. Pokemon VGC has been around for a long time, nearly 30 years. And in that time, players of the game started to make their own words and terminology that spread throughout the community, but that makes no sense to people that are not already in the VGC ecosystem. Because of this, it can be kind of hard for new players to learn what is going on because the people they are watching are throwing out terms they don't understand, and no one is explaining what that term means because they all already know, leaving new players like me and you in the dark. However, I'm going to try my best in this video to share some common vernacular with you so that way you can start to learn how to speak Pokemon VGC. So let's break out the Pokemon VGC Pokédex and dive in. The first term I want to talk about is redirection. This is when a Pokemon forces an opposing Pokemon to change targets of its attack through a move or an ability. You'll see this when Pokemon like Amoonguss use Rage Powder, when a Pachirisu uses Follow Me, a strategy that won Worlds in 2014, or through an ability like Rhyperior's Lightning Rod. Redirection is super important in VGC. It is both a word and a strategy that you absolutely need to know. The next term is spread moves. These are Pokemon moves that hit more than just a single Pokemon. A great example of this is Kyogre's Water Spout or Tornadus's Bleak Wind Storm. Again, super important to know in VGC. It is always a good strategy to try and hit 2 Pokemon at once. Why use 2 move when 1 move do trick? The next up is win condition, or commonly referred to as win con. This is a scenario or situation that you need to happen to win the match. This is commonly used whenever you're behind or when you just need 1 or 2 things to happen to take the win from the opponent. A good example of this would be if you had a Hisuian Arcanine on the field with full health, but your opponent on their side of the field had a low HP for Farigiraf and an Ursaluna with 3/4 health, your win condition would be to rock slide both of those Pokemon, knock out the Farigiraf, get the flinch on Ursaluna, and then on the next move use another move to knock it out. Getting the flinch on Ursaluna is your win con or your win condition. It is the condition that makes you win. You'll hear this a lot in VGC. Next up is cover or coverage. This is when you make up for weaknesses on your team by certain moves on your Pokemon or by having certain other Pokemon on your team. A good example of this is when you have 3 Pokemon on your team, 1 being fire, 1 being water, and 1 being grass. You're able to cover a lot of weaknesses that way that the other Pokemon would have had, and they work really well together. Another good example is making sure that you put Ice Beam on Kyogre, so that way when Rillaboom comes in and tries to give you the Wood Hammer, you're able to Ice Beam it on switch in and remove it from the field before that hammer drops. I am sorry I keep bringing up Kyogre, I just really like the Pokemon, as you can see. I mentioned Fire, Water, Grass teams, so I should probably mention FWG Core or Fire, Water, Grass Core. This is when you build teams around a fire Pokemon, a water Pokemon, and a grass Pokemon because they are a good staple in the VGC team building community. They have really good synergy with each other, they cover each other's weaknesses well, and they're just a really good offensive pairing to have on any VGC team. A similar core to that is the Fantasy Core, except this one is more focused a little bit more on the defensive side, and it is made by building a team around Fairy, Steel, and Dragon type Pokemon. It's a really good way to build teams if you're wanting to get away from that Fire, Water, Grass core and if you're really wanting to build a defensive styled team. Next is speed control, which is just controlling the speed of the match. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it actually is very important because there are lots of ways to accomplish this. You can electroweb your enemy to slow them down. You can tailwind your own team to speed them up. You can use Trick Room to make the fast Pokemon slow and the slow Pokemon fast and make it all topsy-turvy in there. It's a really good strategy to do and a very important thing that you need to know how to do if you want to make it far in VGC. Damage reduction is as simple as it sounds. It's just reducing incoming damage. But there are several ways to accomplish this. There are berries that reduce damage of a certain type. There are moves like Aurora Veil that reduce damage, and there are abilities like Friend Guard which reduce damage. All of these are great methods at keeping your Pokemon on the field longer. Screens are a form of damage reduction that involve putting up both light screen and reflect. Certain Pokemon specialize in putting up screens like Grimmsnarl, which has access to both of those moves and has an ability that allows it to put those screens up before any other Pokemon get to move. Regulation felt like one I should probably cover. Simply put, regulations are just the rule sets that are put in place for a certain range of time that is decided by the Pokemon Company, and all official competitions must adhere to those rule sets within that time frame. If you paid attention to Worlds last week, that was in Regulation G, which allowed the use of one restricted Pokemon. We are now going into Regulation H, which doesn't allow any legendaries or Paradox or restricted Pokemon at all. It's just all the regular Pokemon. It should be a pretty fun regulation, and I am very excited to play my first tournament during Regulation H. But we do go back to Regulation G in January, and the legendaries come back. So if you've ever wanted to get into VGC, but you've been kind of scared off by the use of legendary Pokemon, now is the time to get in because legendaries are nowhere to be found. I said restricted Pokemon in the last section, so let's define what a restricted Pokemon is. It is a super strong Pokemon. Not like Incineroar or Rillaboom or Urshifu, those aren't restricted Pokemon. More like box art legendaries and legendaries of that caliber. Think Mewtwo or Lunala or Dialga or Kyogre or Reshiram or Zacian, or the two strongest ones, the Calyrex Riders or Miraidon. If you need proof of that, watch any Worlds match. This does not include any mythical Pokemon because they didn't want to add those in Regulation G because they're afraid of what I would do to everyone if I had Tailglow Manaphy with Terastallization. The next term is calced or calced to live, literally calculating how your attacks are going to affect your opponent's Pokemon or calculating how your opponent's attacks are going to affect your Pokemon. People use literal damage calculators to figure out the numbers on this, and over time you kind of get used to knowing how the meta Pokemon are going to hit each other. And so when you memorize those and make choices based on those calculations, people like to say that's calced or you calced to live. I will be doing a video in the future on how to use damage calculators because you need to know how to use them to become a super nerd, and you need to be a super nerd to be the best. So make sure to sub and turn on notifications for that. I want to take a moment just to say thank you for the support on this channel so far. My initial goal for the first video was 100 views and maybe 25 subs, and you guys blew it out of the water. Thank you guys so much to everyone who watched, who shared, the people who subscribed, who turned on notifications. I see it. I appreciate it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Let's learn VGC together. God bless you all. Back to the terms, and this one is meta. Meta Pokemon are the most used Pokemon in any given regulation. What Pokemon are and are not in the meta shifts within a regulation and between regulations. If everyone's using Golden Go, that Pokemon becomes meta. If everyone's using Hisuian Decidueye to counter Golden Go, that Pokemon becomes meta. The meta is always shifting and always changing. Regulation H meta includes Pelipper to set up Rain, Archaludon to do Electroshock in Pelipper's Rain, Golden Go because it's a powerhouse, Annihilate because it stacks up Rage Fist and there are just not a lot of good fighting types right now. And the Regulation G meta has already kind of been touched on, but it was Pokemon like Zamazenta, Kyogre, the Calyrex Shadow Riders, and him. The next term is really simple. It's STAB or STAB. It stands for same type attack bonus. When a Pokemon uses a move that is the same type as itself, that move gets a bonus. When a water Pokemon use a water type move, it hit hard. STAB. The next term is priority. There's a hidden priority chart when it comes to Pokemon attack orders, and certain moves get to move up that priority chart, and therefore that Pokemon with the higher priority move will move first regardless of speed. For example, Aqua Jet is a +1 priority move, so it moves before normal Pokemon moves. However, Extreme Speed is a +2 priority, so it moves before Aqua Jet. Protect is a +4 priority, so therefore Pokemon will protect before it's hit with Extreme Speed. And the only 5 priority move is Helping Hands, so nice job, Clefairy. Then there's weather conditions. Certain Pokemon can create certain weather effects on the battlefield. Politoed can make it rain, Tyranitar can whip up a sandstorm, and Torkoal can cause a drought which causes intense sun. These weather conditions provide a ton of various benefits like increasing move accuracy and power when it comes to rain, increasing the defense of rock-type Pokemon when it comes to sandstorm, or allowing weather-dependent moves to be activated like Aurora Veil and Snow. There are too many of these to really dive into, so I will link to Sarah B's weather effects page down below in the description. The next one is a roll or a damage roll. This one's kind of hard to explain, but the main takeaway from it is that Pokemon damage is not a set number, it is more like a range. For example, a Baxcalibur using Ice Shard is not always going to do 60 damage to a Fluttermane. A max attack Baxcalibur hitting a 0 defense Fluttermane hits for 50.3 to 59.5% damage, and it can hit from anywhere within that range. It can hit on the low end and it can hit on the high end. It is more like rolling dice, hence why it is called a damage roll or just a roll. And again, I know damage calculators are confusing. I know EVs and IVs are like foreign languages to new players. I promise to cover these things in future videos. Unfortunately, I can't put out 5 videos a week like I would like to, but make sure to watch the channel as these videos will be available in the future. I do want to cover a couple of the Pokemon types or roles that you will hear whenever people are team building or you're watching a streamer. First up is a pivot. A pivot Pokemon is one that is going to be switched in and out a lot. It is usually a Pokemon that can take a good amount of hits and has a decent speed and good typing. A good example of this is Incineroar, which you will definitely want to pivot because every time it comes in, it lowers the opponent's attack. It has a good way to escape attacks like using U-turn to get off the field, and it has good stats and a good typing to continually come in and out into other Pokemon. Next up is bulky or tank. These are kind of synonymous words, so I'm putting them together. This is a Pokemon that has crazy high defense and HP or just a ridiculous amount in one or the other. It's going to be able to take a lot of hits, and the best description for this is honestly this. Look at the stats on that thing. That is a tank. There's no better way to say it. That's it. Then there's Sweeper. This is a Pokemon that is an offensive powerhouse. It usually has moves or abilities that can really boost its stats, and it already has really good offenses. A good example of this would be like a Salamence that just keeps getting boosted by Moxie, or like a Golden Go that keeps setting up Nasty Plot and building its stats until it's practically unbeatable and just cleans up the end game, hence Sweeper. I know this is just scratching the surface and there are tons of more terms to cover like hacks, board state, knowing your lines, but I can't reasonably cover them all, unfortunately. If you know a Pokemon term that I did not say in this video, please leave it down in the comments so other people can learn from you. Or if you've heard a Pokemon term or a Pokemon VGC term that's kind of has you confused, please also leave that down in the comments, and myself or someone from this awesome community that we're building will be able to answer you and help you on your VGC journey. Like I mentioned in the last video, getting into the community is super important. I don't want my channel to feel like the end-all be-all for Pokemon VGC beginner knowledge, because there are tons of people out there that are way smarter than I am. I am super glad with the people that interacted with the last video and got involved in the communities. If you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, go check out my last video. There are tons of communities that you can join, tons of people that you can rely on. There's a lot of knowledge out there if you just want to get it. If you watched the last video and you talked to me in one of the other communities like the Oko podcast Discord, that was super awesome. I'm super glad that you are taking advantage of these communities, and I hope that we can keep learning together and keep growing in the community together. The incredibly scary topic of team building should be our next video, but we do have a special guest coming onto the channel for that video, so make sure to sub so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I am SB. I will be back when the tide rises. Stay blessed.